19. Felicia Franklin. In September 2023, emergency responders discovered a former Georgia lawmaker named Felicia Franklin passed out on a sidewalk right outside a sports bar in Clayton County. She seemed to be severely distressed in police body cam footage, which featured her screaming at the paramedics who were simply trying to help her. In the video, an EMT was seen approaching Franklin, who was lying down on her side, and pulling her up into a sitting position. As the paramedics strapped her into a stretcher and tried to wheel her toward an ambulance, she wailed loudly and repeatedly screamed out, "They left me here." Later on in the video clip, Franklin was heard yelling at emergency personnel to get out of her face while hurling other abusive and profane statements at the people who only wanted to get her some help. Franklin lost her job over the Drunken incident, but she wasn't about to accept this outcome without fighting back. The disgraced former lawmaker denied all of the allegations that she was drunk despite it being obvious. In a lawsuit made against her former employer, she claimed that someone drugged her with GHB before she passed out on the pavement. The lawsuit further alleges that Franklin was found not exactly passed out, but crying and in a vulnerable position when first responders got to the scene. A police spokesperson said that there was zero evidence to support Franklin's claim of being drugged with GHB, including no signs that anyone tampered with her drinks at the bar. The representative also claimed that investigators had thoroughly reviewed footage of Franklin going into the bar alone and ordering multiple drinks, including 3 cocktails containing Hennessy and Grand Marnier. She also had a glass of wine and took a sip of another customer's beer throughout the night. During another video, police show Franklin receipts proving that she had more drinks than she first admitted to. In response, she said that she didn't remember having all 5 drinks. She also claimed that a few of the drinks on the receipt were bought for other bar patrons and not consumed by her. Franklin continues to firmly stand by her side of the story and has vowed to see that her vision of justice is served in the end. 18. Bitten on a British Airways flight. During a British Airways flight from Dubai to London back in April 2016, a 21-year-old passenger became extremely drunk and unruly. A fellow traveler on the plane named Christopher McNerlin stepped in to help get the unnamed man under control and, in the process, was bitten on the arm. When the flight finally landed, the disruptive passenger was immediately arrested on suspicion of being drunk on an aircraft and assault with actual bodily harm. In the meantime, McNerlin went to the hospital to get treated for his bite wound. His willingness to put himself in harm's way luckily did not go unnoticed by the plane's captain, who gave him a private tour of the cockpit as a token of the airline's appreciation after the plane parked in a hangar. McNerlin summed up the experience in a simple Instagram post, writing, "That time when you help restrain and handcuff a nutter at 40,000 feet. He bites you, but it's all okay because Captain Kendall lets you sit in the cockpit." 17. Jamal Wing. During what started off as a routine speeding traffic stop at around 1:40 in the morning during July 2023, a Delaware man named Jamal Wing allegedly attacked a police canine. It's also been reported that he also bit the dog several times as well. According to state police, the 47-year-old suspect got out of his car without being told to do so by officers after being pulled over in a Wilmington parking lot. He was also accused of refusing to follow the officer's commands to get back into the car while resisting arrest. In the process of restraining Wing, troopers said that they noticed the smell of alcohol on his breath and a few other signs of impairment. Before taking the suspect to booking, police drove him to the hospital to receive treatment for multiple injuries, including a large gash above his eye. During his time spent at the emergency room, he allegedly continued trying to escape police custody. After his release from the hospital, Wing was charged with assaulting the canine as well as responding officers, driving under the influence, resisting arrest with force, criminal mischief, disorderly conduct, speeding in excess, and failure to have required license. The outcome of the case is unclear. 16. Samantha Lynn Goody. In fall 2017, a 22-year-old woman named Samantha Lynn Goody made national news headlines for trying to storm the field during a University of Iowa football game that was held against Northern Illinois. Also known by her Twitter handle, @vodka_Sam, a popular account with thousands of followers, she allegedly blew a 0.341, over 4 times the legal limit, during a breathalyzer test given to her. Usually people are embarrassed after getting arrested. The majority of them refrain from plastering the news all over social media, but there are always a few exceptions, and Goody happened to be one of them. After being released from custody, she shamelessly announced her arrest and discussed her brief stint in jail in a series of tweets. In one post, she wrote that she was going to get .341, her breathalyzer result, tattooed on her since it's so epic. Goody must have come to her senses or had second thoughts though, because she deleted her Twitter account right as her fanbase really started to gain momentum, leaving her 20,000 followers wondering what happened next with her legal case. But as they say, once you put something out online, it stays there forever. And both Goody's photos and posts continued to circulate even after she took a step back from social media. Of course, there were plenty of memes that made light of the situation, along with a custom-designed t-shirt to commemorate her drunken shenanigans and her shockingly boastful behavior afterward. 15. Mark Cox. A Polish strip club came under fire in recent years after a British tourist named Mark Cox died from alcohol poisoning during his visit. According to several reports, staff members at the Wild nightclub in Krakow lured Mark and his friend inside the club one night back in 2017 by offering the men free entry. Mark proceeded to drink about 22 shots over a brief 90-minute period before finally collapsing and passing away. The club was accused of forcing the shots on Mark even after he said that he'd had enough and wanted to stop drinking for the night. After he lost consciousness, employees allegedly robbed him of about 2,200 Polish zloty, or $550. A post-mortem toxicology test revealed that Mark had a blood alcohol content of around 0.4 when he died, which is equal to 5 times the legal limit for driving in most U.S. states. In 2023, 6 years after the incident happened, Polish authorities charged 58 people in connection to Mark's death. The suspects are accused of being members of an organized crime ring that targets and robs tourists. They allegedly forced Mark to take the shots even after he clearly expressed that he did not want to drink anymore, and failed to seek medical attention for him after he fell unconscious. Mark's friend, Steven Skiba, later told news reporters that the club bouncer laughed right in his face and said, "Your friend is dead." The arrests came on the heels of several nightclub raids, which resulted in over 700 charges being brought against members of the organized group for various crimes. According to police, the illicit organization's MO was to get wealthy-looking tourists drunk and then take advantage of their impaired state by robbing them blind and running expensive charges on their credit cards. The current status of the case is unclear, but hopefully strides towards justice are being made. 14. Christina Chambers. The next item on today's list will make any bad date you've been on seem amazing in comparison. 33-year-old Joe McMullen had just met up with a woman for the first time when a drunk driver suddenly mowed him down with her Porsche at 100 miles per hour back in April 2023. According to Houston police officers, 32-year-old Christina Chambers' blood alcohol content was over 4 times the legal limit when she failed to navigate a curve properly and struck McMullen, who was sent flying about 30 feet into the air before he fatally crashed into a pole at 2:30 in the morning. McMullen's date, Brianna Iturino, told local news station KTRK that the two had just gone to karaoke earlier that night and were feeling a bit hungry afterward. A nearby taco truck was closed, so they decided to head to a donut shop for a bite to eat. Instead of driving, the pair walked to enjoy the fresh air and each other's company. Out of nowhere, Brianna felt Joe fly past her as something lightly grazed her hip. She called 911 and followed the dispatcher's instructions to perform CPR. But her date passed away at the scene. Brianna described Joe as an extremely sweet guy who smiled a lot and had really good taste in music. Sadly, they didn't get the opportunity to go on a second date. In addition to being drunk, Chambers allegedly had traces of several drugs in her possession, including what looked to be cocaine. She told the responding police officers that she had one beer 5 hours before the crash, but they didn't believe her for glaringly obvious reasons, and also because the toxicology test results told them an entirely different story. Chambers and her 2 passengers were all injured in the wreck. One of the passengers reportedly claimed that Chambers didn't drink at the last bar they visited. Investigators said they planned to look into the possibility that Chambers could have been overserved before she got behind the wheel. She was later charged with intoxication manslaughter. The accused drunk driver's defense attorney blamed the accident on poor road conditions, while the prosecution is painting a picture of someone who deserves to be held criminally responsible for their actions. According to the most recent updates on the case, Chambers was out on bond while awaiting her trial date. She was banned from driving except for work-related purposes and was ordered to install a landline phone at her house so she could prove she was following her bail conditions. 13. Dr. Jason Lane. Dr. Jason Lane was a fairly well-respected physician and surgeon based out of San Diego. In October 2013, his career took an unexpected left turn when he showed up at work so drunk that he collapsed on the floor and had to be driven to the emergency room. A toxicology test showed that Lane had a blood alcohol content of 0.39, almost 5 times the legal limit in his state. He was fired from his job just a few days later. According to a formal complaint filed by the California Medical Board, Lane and his wife argued about his drinking the night before he passed out at work. He admitted to drinking 2 bottles of wine right before bed, then waking up during the night and drinking 8 more ounces of the alcoholic beverage. Aware that his drinking had spiraled wildly out of control, Lane went through a 7-day detox before checking himself into a 30-day rehab program, followed by 6 weeks of outpatient treatment. After that, he continued focusing on his sobriety as well as his mental health while regularly attending AA meetings. In the meantime, Lane underwent exhaustive proceedings to try and keep his medical license. As part of the lengthy process, he faced a few unpleasant but undeniable truths about himself. Lane admitted that his binge drinking tendencies dated way back to his college years, and that the habit only got worse after he served in the military and started struggling with PTSD. His drinking was reportedly at its worst when he collapsed that day on the job. By then, he was already consuming at least 1 bottle of wine each day and experiencing withdrawal symptoms during his working hours. He denied ever drinking on the job, even though he admitted to showing up at work drunk multiple times. The medical board eventually decided to give Lane a second chance at his career under a set of extremely strict guidelines. He was to be put on probation for 10 years, which includes regular drug and alcohol testing, routine mental health screenings, active participation in a 12-step program, and being under the careful supervision of another doctor. Lane was also barred from directly overseeing physicians' assistants. 12. Ryan Pezzini. In more recent years, there's been a growing debate in the United States and elsewhere about whether or not someone should be allowed to argue in court that they're less culpable of a crime they committed while highly intoxicated. This was the argument used by a 27-year-old Massachusetts man named Ryan Pezzini, who killed 68-year-old David Matisek in a drunk driving collision back in 2016. According to police officers, Pezzini ran a red light mere moments before the accident. Matisek was on his way to get gas while his wife was attending church. There were no tire marks on the road indicating that Pezzini slammed on the brakes, and his brake lights were also not activated in footage of the crash, proving that he made no clear attempt to stop before he fatally hit the victim's vehicle. Shortly before the collision, Pezzini had actually struck another vehicle. The driver would later testify in court that she'd gotten out of her car and told Pezzini to get out of his vehicle because he was drunk. Instead of doing that, he drove off and hit Matisek's truck just a few moments later. Pezzini's blood alcohol content was almost 4 times the legal limit at the time of the crash. He walked away with only minor injuries and was charged with manslaughter while still under the influence of liquor. The accused drunk driver decided to forego a trial with a jury, instead opting to let a judge decide his fate. Pezzini's lawyer argued that his client was too drunk to have formed an intent to commit the horrific crime, and that meant he was not guilty of the crime. The defense attorney also pointed out that Pezzini would have suffered much less severe consequences if he'd been charged with motor vehicle homicide while under the influence of an intoxicating substance instead of manslaughter while under the influence of alcohol. A respected expert on these matters, Robert Powers, even testified that Pezzini was too drunk to understand the severe risks that his action posed to himself and others. In an effort to prove this point, the forensic toxicologist pointed out how Pezzini ran through a red light right before the crash, noting that the defendant clearly lacked the ability to tell what color the traffic light was or that it meant he needed to stop. The prosecution argued that Pezzini displayed reckless behavior and that his actions ventured beyond negligence. Additionally, the state told the court that Pezzini had a chance to change his behavior after a previous drunk driving conviction he was involved with in 2010. The judge agreed with the prosecution and found Pezzini guilty. He was also convicted of leaving the scene of a personal injury accident and was sentenced to serve 11 to 12 years in state prison. 11. Jacqueline Klein. The future was looking bright and shiny for 43-year-old Jacqueline Klein in 2023. She'd recently become a finalist for a vacant spot on the Northeast Independent School District's Board of Trustees in San Antonio, Texas. But her good standing with the community was called into question in October, when the district sued her for over 2 years' worth of unpaid property taxes. Things became even worse 1 month later, when news reports revealed that Klein had been accused of spitting on an Uber driver while drunk and kicking his car door repeatedly earlier that same year. According to police records obtained by local news station KSAT, the incident took place near the San Antonio International Airport on May 3rd. Officers responded to a call made about a woman spitting on her husband at 3 o'clock in the morning. After arriving at the scene, they determined that there was no relation between the two and that the victim was actually Klein's Uber driver. The driver told police officers that the altercation between them started when he politely asked Klein not to slam the car door after she got into his vehicle. Klein allegedly became so explosively angry by the simple request that the driver no longer felt safe transporting her and stopped outside a convenience store to make her get out of the car. According to the police report, there were no clear signs of damage to the car, and there was no longer any visible evidence of spit on the driver's clothes. Speaking with KSAT, the driver accused Klein of cussing him out throughout the entire drive. He said that he wiped her spit off before the police got there because he didn't want it on him, which is completely understandable. Klein was taken to a local drunk tank to sober up after blowing over twice the legal limit on a breathalyzer test. She had a blood alcohol content of 0.204 and was arrested on suspicion of public intoxication. The trustee candidate was ultimately spared from being held in jail and was released once she sobered up. Klein declined KSAT's request for a comment. As of early 2024, she seemed to still be in the running for the trustee position. 10. Sean Madden. In a cringe-worthy incident that, of course, happened in Florida, a 40-year-old Palm Coast resident named Sean Madden dropped his drawers to prove to the police that he was unarmed during an incident that took place outside his home in October 2023. According to an arrest report, Flagler County deputies visited the property in response to a complaint made about a loud argument. They met an irate and shirtless Madden, who allegedly started challenging the deputies to a fight the moment they got out of their squad cars. Instead of adding fuel to the situation, the deputies stayed impressively calm while encouraging Madden to talk to them about what had happened. One deputy even asked the suspect how much he'd had to drink that day, but he never responded to that question. Madden continued acting belligerent and seemed to think that law enforcement was accusing him of doing something wrong. After angrily asking what he did, he said he wasn't brandishing anything and dropped his shorts straight to his ankles right in the middle of the neighborhood. He then asked, "Where's my weapon?" The distraught suspect quickly surrendered after this and was charged with disorderly intoxication and assault on an officer. Madden was later released on a $2,000 bond and is currently awaiting his next court date. 9. Daryl Lee Campbell. In a hilarious but creepy twist of fate, a 54-year-old Florida man was taken into custody for drunk driving while wearing breathalyzer-themed underwear back in April 2018. According to police officers, Daryl Lee Campbell was pulled over after his Dodge pickup truck was seen weaving erratically along a highway in Port St. Lucie around 3 o'clock in the morning. Before the traffic stop, the suspect allegedly threw a black object out of his vehicle's window. The item was never recovered, and Campbell was handcuffed during his conversation with law enforcement thanks to his furtive actions and for officer safety. Campbell reportedly claimed that at the time he was on his way to help a friend who had a flat tire. During the arrest, he was barefoot and in his underwear, which ironically featured an arrow pointing toward the crotch and the words, "Free breathalyzer, blow here." Despite being clad in his skivvies and having no shoes on, his hair was surprisingly well kept, being both gelled and styled. According to an arrest report, Campbell seemed overly jittery and like he was possibly under the influence or high on some sort of stimulant. Sheriff's deputies gave him a chance to prove otherwise by undergoing a field sobriety test. But he declined and was arrested on suspicion of drunk driving. Inside the vehicle, they found a few items that were suspicious but not necessarily criminal, including condoms and a pair of binoculars that were sitting in the front passenger seat. At the very least, it makes Campbell's story about helping a stranded friend questionable, and leads one to wonder what he was actually doing before he was pulled over. Police suspected that he was likely scouting the area for prostitutes or looking to engage in other lewd and lascivious behavior. At the time, Campbell had 2 past drunk driving convictions on his record, along with prior convictions for cocaine possession, resisting arrest, as well as carrying a concealed weapon. The outcome of the case is currently unclear. 8. Estacy Sanchez. A 69-year-old homeless man named Jack Ray Tenhulzen was minding his own business while walking along the San Diego County sidewalk in 2016 when a drunk driver suddenly rammed into him. He was struck with such immense force that he went flying straight through the windshield and was killed instantly. The impact of the crash also stripped Tenhulzen of his clothing and severed a portion of his leg, which flew through the rear windshield and landed on top of the car's trunk. The driver, Estacy Sanchez, continued driving for over a mile, with the deceased victim's body still in the front seat. She parked near her apartment building in Oceanside and walked the rest of the way home. Once there, she called her boyfriend and changed her clothes. According to authorities, Sanchez drank beer and at least 5 other alcoholic beverages before the crash. 2 hours after the accident, her blood alcohol content was still measuring between 0.18 and 0.19. More than twice the legal limit for driving. Eager to make a firm example out of Sanchez, prosecutors chose to charge her with murder. They were determined to show the public what can happen if someone knows they shouldn't drink and drive, but consciously choose to do so anyway. The defense argued that Sanchez fell asleep at some point while driving home from a party, and that the incident was caused by her being tired, not drunk. Arguing that a vehicular manslaughter charge would have been much more appropriate, Sanchez's attorney claimed that his client failed to report the crash as required by law, and instead drove home because she freaked out and panicked after waking up and seeing the victim's body. In 2018, a jury found Sanchez guilty of second-degree murder, gross vehicular manslaughter while intoxicated, and hit and run. She was sentenced to serve 15 years to life in prison. 7. Jeffrey Exxon. When it comes to the list of possible worst-case scenarios for alcoholics, most would agree that a situation resulting in the loss of an innocent life would rank near the top. A 47-year-old father from Kansas named Jeffrey J. Exxon allegedly murdered his own daughter Aurora in early 2021 when he passed out drunk for days and didn't get up a single time to feed her. By the time he got up, realized something was wrong with Aurora, and called 911, she'd already been dead from malnutrition for multiple days. Exxon told the 911 dispatcher that Aurora had been choosing to starve herself. But investigators knew better than to believe his lies. And the 5 empty liquor bottles they discovered in his room spoke volumes about what truly happened. During his trial, a surviving member of the household testified that Exxon would often lock the children alone in their rooms for days while he slept. Aurora's mom told the court that she had given up custody of the young girl and her brother because her living situation wasn't good enough to meet their needs. It was made pretty clear in court that the defendant struggled with substance abuse. But sympathy is hard to find when it comes to tragedies of this magnitude. The jury found Exxon guilty of first-degree murder in the commission of a felony, reckless but unintentional second-degree murder, aggravated child endangerment, as well as failure to report a death. He received the maximum sentence of almost 57 years in prison, which means that he'll most likely spend the remainder of his days locked up behind bars. 6. Angela Chow. American businesswoman Angela Chow was the billionaire CEO of a privately owned shipping company known as Foremost Group. She was also the sister-in-law of Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell. Her life came to a tragic end during February 2024 when she accidentally backed her Tesla into a pond and drowned. This came while she was celebrating the Lunar New Year at her ranch in Johnson City, Texas. She was only 50 years old, and just 1 hour earlier, she'd been enjoying a large dinner with friends without a care in the world. As the car slowly sank into the muddy pond, Chow was unable to open the driver's side door or break any of the windows. She spent 8 frantic minutes on the phone with a friend, telling them she was going to die as the car quickly filled with water. Angela's friends swam out to the car and did everything they possibly could to try rescuing her, but they couldn't get into the vehicle. Knowing that she probably wasn't going to survive the ordeal, Chow told the friend she was talking to that she loved her and said her final goodbyes as the water gradually rose past her head. Witnesses called 911, but by the time emergency responders got to the scene, it was sadly too late to save Chow's life. A Blanco County deputy dragged her lifeless body from the vehicle after breaking open the window and diving underwater to grab her. Emergency responders tried their best to revive Chow, but she remained unresponsive and was ultimately pronounced dead about an hour after the car was submerged. A report that was released the next month revealed that Chow's blood alcohol content was almost 3 times the legal limit for driving in Texas. 5. Stephen Albritton. It's bad enough when someone is passed out and drunk behind the wheel. A 46-year-old Florida man named Stephen K. Albritton made things infinitely worse for himself in 2016 when he was caught red-handed in that situation with his kids in the back seat. According to police officers, Albritton's Ford Expedition was seen in the turning lane of an intersection in the village of Estero. The SUV wasn't running, but its hazard lights were turned on. The suspect's teenage daughter was still reportedly in the front passenger seat while his son was sitting in the back. Sheriff's deputies tried to wake Albritton, but had little to no success. At one point, he allegedly raised his head up slightly, looked at one of the cops, mumbled a few unintelligible words, and passed back out. According to an arrest report, Albritton smelled incredibly strongly of booze and was unable to perform basic skills, offer personal information, follow directions, or even get out of the vehicle or stand up on his own. Albritton was taken to a nearby hospital where a toxicology test revealed that his blood alcohol content measured at 0.604. That's more than 7 times the legal limit for his state. All things considered, he was extremely lucky that the situation didn't get worse. In addition to being fortunate that he didn't crash his car, he was lucky to still be alive, considering the vast amount of alcohol in his system. According to experts, a blood alcohol content of 0.3 is often enough to cause alcohol poisoning, and a level of 0.45 or higher is considered to be life-threatening. It took over 5 hours, but the accused drunk driver was eventually coherent and responsive. Albritton denied drinking any alcohol that day, but as far as law enforcement was concerned, the test results spoke for themselves. He was ultimately charged with felony child neglect and misdemeanor counts of driving under the influence and refusing a DUI test. And his children were released to the custody of their mother. Speaking with the Fort Myers-based News Press, a medical toxicologist named Dr. Timothy Dougherty said that it's pretty rare for someone to have a blood alcohol content of 0.6 or higher, but that he'd seen it before. In those cases, it typically means that the person has built up a significant alcohol tolerance. But Dougherty warned that this doesn't always mean they're capable of driving or doing anything else that a normal person should refrain from while drinking. 4. Cynthia Teeple. In September 2020, while responding to a call about a topless woman seen at a residence in Jacksboro, Tennessee, a pair of Campbell County deputies met 47-year-old Cynthia Lynn Teeple. In addition to being topless in public, she was allegedly chewing on the mane of a miniature pony. According to a police report, she was also seen eating both grass and dirt. Teeple said that she didn't know what she did with her shirt, which a deputy found about 30 feet from where the woman was standing at the time. According to a report obtained by local news station WLAF, she told one of the deputies that the horse's mane was made of Laffy Taffy and Airhead candy. On top of her obnoxiously strange behavior, Teeple showed a few other signs of intoxication. She was allegedly unsteady on her feet and stumbling thanks to what seemed to be involuntary muscle movements. For her own safety, a deputy asked her to take a seat. During the conversation, the police noticed that Teeple's speech was greatly slurred, adding on to their suspicion that she was impaired. She appeared to have no knowledge of where she was or how she even got there, and reportedly admitted to using meth the day before. Teeple was arrested on suspicion of public intoxication. It's unclear whether or not she was just high on meth or if she was also drunk at the time she was arrested. But considering her odd behavior, it's probably safe to assume that she was definitely under the influence of some sort of mind-altering substance, if not multiple. 3. Airza Phillips. 28-year-old Airza Phillips of Kalamazoo, Michigan, had almost twice the legal limit of alcohol in his system when he fatally T-boned an elderly couple's car back in 2021. His Dodge Durango was going about 115 miles per hour, or 185 kilometers per hour, when he barreled straight into the Chevy Impala, killing 83-year-old Joel Schaefer and his 84-year-old wife Dolores. The couple unfortunately passed away at the scene. A passenger in the suspect's car, Rainia Gray, survived with permanent injuries. She would later remember waking up in the hospital hooked up to life support. According to police officers, Gray had rented the Durango. She and Phillips were on their way to Chicago, and Phillips had taken over the driving about a half hour before the accident. At the scene of the crash, Phillips showed obvious signs of being intoxicated, including slurred speech and watery eyes. Inside the SUV, officers spotted an almost empty bottle of margarita wine. Phillips was later charged with murder. Surviving members of the Schaefer family told local news station WWMT that they didn't believe the crash would have been fatal if Phillips had just been going the speed limit. They wanted him to sit behind bars and reflect long and hard on his actions, as well as the losses they suffered thanks to his poor choices. The defense argued that the Schaefers' deaths were the direct result of a tragic accident, and that his client had tried to apply the brakes in an attempt to avoid hitting the elderly couple's vehicle. Richard Noel, who witnessed the crash in person, testified that Phillips was driving so fast that his car shook when the defendant drove past him on the road. Noel described the gut-wrenching realization that there was more than likely no way the victims had survived the crash that he'd watched unfold with his own 2 eyes. In 2023, Phillips was found guilty of 2 counts of driving while intoxicated, causing death. He was sentenced to serve 20 to 30 years in prison. 2. Stephen Childers. In July 2023, Sergeant Stephen Childers of the Houston Police Department met with a lieutenant to discuss a concerning issue. During the conversation, the lieutenant started to feel like something was off about the sergeant's behavior. In keeping with the policy of holding their fellow officers accountable under the law, the suspicious lieutenant had Childers checked out for possible drunkenness. Based on the results, Childers was immediately arrested on suspicion of driving drunk. It's unclear whether he was on duty at the time, but he was still suspended from his job pending the outcome of his case. Attorney Steve Schellist, who was not directly involved, told ABC 13 that it was unlikely for the charges against Childers to be elevated if nobody was injured by his behavior, even if he was carrying a gun, which would result in heightened charges for an accused civilian drunk driver. Schellist went on to explain that there was a possibility of criminal defendants getting their cases thrown out if they could prove that there was a likelihood of Childers being drunk when he either arrested or ticketed them. At the time of his arrest, Childers was a 27-year veteran of the force. He was joined in jail by a fellow officer, Stephen Martinez, who was also taken into custody the same day for allegedly hitting his girlfriend in a domestic dispute. The current status of both the officers' cases are unclear. And now for number 1. But if you want to hear more bizarre and crazy stories, stay tuned after the video for some more content. 1. Russell Brown. During a trip to Scottsdale, Arizona, towards the beginning of 2023, Canadian Supreme Court Justice Russell Brown allegedly got drunk and started acting strangely toward a group of fellow resort guests, who accused him of joining them without an invitation and trying to follow several women up to their hotel rooms. According to the cringeworthy details of a police report, Brown approached the strangers in the resort's lounge and bragged about the importance of his job. He also read a few lines from a speech he delivered earlier that day. Female witnesses later described Brown as being overly creepy and claimed that he kept kissing their hands and trying to flirt with them, even after they told him repeatedly to stop. They were the same women who accused the judge of following them to their rooms later on. Brown's behavior allegedly grew so persistent that a witness named Jonathan Crump punched him several times in an attempt to get him to stop being so weird. Crump reportedly told Brown that he was clearly intoxicated and that he was making many people uncomfortable, who responded by pushing him and clocking him twice. By the time police officers arrived, Brown was in his room. When they knocked to confront him about his actions, he didn't answer the door. Officers took a report from Crump and others who were willing to speak up, and they concluded that Crump's decision to punch Brown appeared reasonable and necessary. And while no arrests were made in this case, Crump complained to Canada's Supreme Court, and Brown was put on leave pending the outcome of an investigation. He initially avoided commenting to the public, but later denied Crump's allegations and claimed that he was attacked in an unprovoked fashion. Brown resigned several months later after an investigation into the incident.
Number 9. A conspicuous criminal. Rapper Philip Nicholas Castabanis, better known by his stage name Stitches, apparently didn't feel like walking to the entrance of a Miami Whole Foods store during a grocery run back in 2017. He parked his Porsche in a handicapped spot, even though he didn't have a legal permit. A nearby police officer recognized the musician and his car from previous run-ins. The cop pulled Stitches over as he tried exiting the parking lot. During their conversation, he asked the rapper if he had a gun inside the vehicle. Stitches said no, then allegedly handed the officer a lit joint. This was more than enough to give the officer probable cause to search the car. They found a Glock, 2 magazines containing bullets, a jar full of marijuana, and a single oxycodone pill. During the search, Stitches reportedly apologized to the police and said he thought they were asking if he had a weapon on him, not just in his car. He was quickly arrested on felony gun and drug charges, but struck a deal with prosecutors, allowing him to avoid prison time by participating in an intervention program. After the case, Stitches told the press that he was done with hard drugs and was ready to focus on his family and making positive changes in his life. But he landed in hot water with the law once again in 2022 when he was arrested for felony cocaine possession and firing a gun in public. He got a lucky break a month later when the prosecutor dropped the charges, since the police had failed to submit the alleged drugs to a lab for testing. It's unclear why the evidence wasn't handled properly, and as far as the allegations against the rapper for shooting a gun in public go, he claimed he was defending his family. It seems as if that charge was also dropped. Number 8. A morbid mix-up. In 2015, 3 teenagers broke into a house in St. Charles County, Missouri, and found a container filled with what they believed was cocaine. They swiped it, along with some jewelry, cash, electronics, and prescription painkillers, thinking they'd scored big time. Homeowner Deborah Matthews came home to find the valuables missing, along with her dead father's ashes. After fleeing the scene, the suspects tasted the cremated remains and quickly realized it wasn't cocaine. Investigators tracked the thieves down through the IP address of an Xbox 360 they stole from the home. It turned out that they were acquaintances of the victim. Deborah told local news outlet KSDK that she never thought the young men would steal from her. During questioning, one of the suspects admitted to acting as a lookout while his accomplices looted the home. Police recovered some of the stolen goods, but were unable to recover the sentimental ashes which the teens had thrown out of their car window after realizing it wasn't drugs. This wasn't the first time a burglar mistook someone's ashes for drugs either. 3 years earlier, in 2011, a group of burglars took a few containers of what they thought were heroin or cocaine from a home in Florida. Instead of getting high, though, they caught a big whiff of the homeowner's late husband and Great Danes. The thieves considered returning the ashes, but chose to dump them in a nearby lake instead of facing the embarrassment. Number 7. A heavy haul. During a routine traffic patrol outside Casa Grande, Arizona in 2015, a Pinal County Sheriff's deputy tried pulling a Chevy Trailblazer over for speeding. Instead of following the law, though, the driver sped off, leading authorities on a high-speed, high-intensity chase down Interstate 8. At some point during the pursuit, which reached speeds of over 100 miles per hour, 161 kilometers per hour, the suspects began tossing bales of marijuana out their windows. And they didn't just throw a few bales. The bales just kept coming as the driver tried outrunning law enforcement. A lot of the marijuana was never recovered because motorists were pulling over to grab it, but law enforcement did manage to stop the vehicle with spike strips. Even with a lot of disappearing evidence, Mario Perez Paz and Juan Aguilar Zavala were in serious trouble. The investigation led to the discovery of a stash house where deputies recovered nearly 400 pounds, 181 kilograms of weed. During questioning, the men claimed that a woman offered them money to transport the packages and that they didn't know what was inside. But the investigators weren't born yesterday, and they slapped the pair with charges including conspiring to transport drugs for sale and unlawful flight from law enforcement. Number 6. Robbery at Cucumber Point. In 2013, a man entered a gambling store in Glasgow, Scotland with an unusual weapon and demanded cash from an employee. The worker later told police that she was worried the robber had a gun but still refused to give him money. Luckily, an officer happened to be in the store at the time of the robbery. He sprang into action and knocked the thief down to the floor in one swoop. When the officer removed the sock covering the suspect's weapon, he realized it was a cucumber. The man was trying to pass it off as a shotgun. The suspect, Gary Ruff, initially claimed that the robbery was a joke. He was still arrested, and he learned the hard way that vegetable armed theft isn't a laughing matter. Defense attorney Tony Graham said that he could give no explanation for why Ruff tried to rob the store, adding that the defendant, who was a plumber and made decent money, had no big financial issues or other motives for committing the crime. Graham also admitted that his client knew the sock-covered cucumber might seem like a dangerous weapon. After failing to downplay the seriousness of his actions, Ruff pleaded guilty to assault with the intent to rob and was handed 40 months in prison. Number 5. Winning lotto ticket meets washing machine. Right as the California State Lottery jackpot hit $26 million in 2020, a woman from Norwalk, just outside Los Angeles, realized she had purchased a winning ticket, but she had stuck it in her pocket and couldn't find it later on. Just days before the 180-day deadline to claim the prize approached, she contacted the Lotto Authority and told them she was pretty sure she'd accidentally washed and destroyed the winning ticket with pieces of her laundry. A worker from the store where the woman bought the ticket recognized her and remembered selling it. The transaction was also captured on surveillance footage, but investigators concluded that there wasn't enough evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that she was the winner, even though the winning ticket was traced to the convenience store where she bought it, and nobody else had come forward claiming the funds. As the deadline approached, a Lotto spokesperson said that unless a last-minute winner showed up, the money would go to the state's public school system. It wouldn't be the first time a lottery winner failed to claim their prize in California. In 2022, the lottery revealed that $46.8 million of prize money goes unclaimed on average each year. Spokeswoman Carolyn Becker told KTLA that in many cases people lose their tickets or just don't realize they've won. And while the Lottery Authority has a way of knowing if a winning ticket has been purchased, they are unable to track down buyers' identities. So while your odds of hitting the jackpot are almost as slim as they would be if you just didn't play the lottery at all, it's a good idea to keep track of your tickets because it's the responsibility of the buyer to know if they've won. Number 4. Drunk driver mistakes police station for hotel. One unfortunate man became the laughingstock of the entire internet overnight in 2009 for making one of the worst drunk driving mistakes ever. A normal Sunday morning for Louisiana state troopers in Baton Rouge took a hilarious turn when 25-year-old Mitchell Delate knocked on their front door. The trooper working the front desk buzzed him inside, and it quickly became clear that the young man was incredibly confused. Delate asked if he was at a hotel, mistaking the trooper as a front desk clerk, but instead of checking into a room, he was instead booked on suspicion of DWI. He did manage to get a free stay in the local jail, though. It's hard not to laugh at the mix-up, but driving drunk is always a bad decision and isn't a laughing matter. While getting arrested sucks, the suspect was lucky nobody was hurt and that someone was able to stop him from getting back behind the wheel. Hopefully, the experience and the less than flattering news headlines taught him a lifelong, valuable lesson. Number 3. Father-son duo commit robbery in drag. A 38-year-old British man named Martin Pick and his teenage son Declan made international news headlines back in 2015 after they were caught on camera robbing a convenience store and post office in West Yorkshire. Here's the kicker. The two were disguised as elderly women. The younger Pick pushed his father in a wheelchair, while both men donned lousy wigs, long coats, hats, sunglasses, and flowery handbags. Surveillance footage showed Declan shuffling into the store and pulling his dad's large wheelchair in. He seemed to struggle as he turned the chair around and pushed Martin deeper into the store. Once they were ready to strike, Martin threw off the blanket on his lap and leapt up. He and Declan robbed the store at gunpoint, while there were actual elderly customers inside. The father and son duo were recorded escaping the scene on foot. They clearly put a lot of thought and effort into planning the crime, but they didn't pull it off as smoothly as they hoped. Not only were their disguises terrible, they didn't even make it to their getaway car before being chased down by civilians and the store owner, who tackled them to the ground and ripped their costumes off. The pair and their getaway driver, Martin's brother Mark, were all charged in connection with the botched robbery. Martin was sentenced to 18 years in prison, Mark received a 16-year sentence, and Declan was sent to a young offenders institution for 8 long years. Number 2. Gamers pose as cops to skip video game line. As the release date for the wildly popular Grand Theft Auto 5 video game approached in 2013, eager gamers lined up outside stores in hopes of getting a copy. But 3 young men from New York City were so determined to avoid the long waits that they concocted an elaborate ruse to skip to the front of the line. Over 500 people were waiting outside the Staten Island Mall for GameStop to open when the trio rolled up in an old police car that they had bought at an auction, complete with lights and a phony siren. The men flashed forged badges and identified themselves as NYPD officers as they bypassed honest customers as if they were royalty. And for the most part, their plan worked out. A security guard offered them coffee, and the owner of the GameStop store thanked them for providing extra security. They accomplished their goal of cutting everyone else in line and bought the video game, but their plan went horribly wrong just a few minutes later when a real officer saw their vehicle making an illegal U-turn and blowing through multiple red lights. The cop pulled the fake squad car over and quickly put pieces together. Frank Santana Starzo, Matthew Kershaw, and Karolos Abdel Sayed were charged with criminal impersonation and had the embarrassing honor of landing on news headlines for the crime. Number 1. Fleeing Florida man lands in nudist colony. 20-year-old Milton Hodges was wanted by authorities in Green Cove Springs, Florida for a 2012 armed robbery when he allegedly struck again at a Lowe's store in Kissimmee. According to employees, he pretended to shop for mango and banana trees before trying to rob 2 cashiers and holding a pair of scissors up to a worker's neck. Bystanders chased him out of the store as he attempted to flee. In a strange twist of fate, he jumped over the wall of a neighboring nudist colony where it was easy for police to find him since he was the only person there with all his clothes on. In a last-ditch effort to escape law enforcement, the young thief reportedly threatened residents with a large knife and stole a golf cart from a local security guard. Deputies quickly caught up with Hodges and arrested him at gunpoint. In addition to the long list of arrests that the fleeing felon had under his belt, dating back to the tender age of 8, he caught a bunch of new charges that included 10 felonies. He's currently serving time at a Florida state prison and will be released in 2031 if he manages to keep up the good behavior between now and then.
Thanks for watching. People are often quick to forgive drunken behavior, however embarrassing it may be. If a friend acted terribly toward you during a night out, would you give them some grace for having too much to drink? Or would you hold them accountable for their behavior as if they were sober? Let us know in the comments below.